Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Can you confirm in the chat if you can hear us and if you can see the slides, please, before we get started? Thank you, Rasha. That was quick. Thank you. Thank you all, Laurent. Can you also try if we can hear you?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can. Yes and yes. Perfect. Awesome. Well, with no further ado, let's get started. The other one will be coming while we do the introduction. Today, we're going to talk about investing in the right consulting project. I think that's a topic that is dear to our hearts, right, Laurent? That's the one that we talk a lot about, and we have never done any webinar about it. It's a first for us to talk about.
Yeah, we call it lever number one, and that's the last one we are talking about. You're right. Yeah,
so it makes sense. No, we have two more after. You being mischievous. We have two more after that. To present ourselves, Laurent and I have both founders of Consulting Quest. Consulting Quest, it's a company that is specialized in how to buy consulting services. I think that's no surprise to that. I'm more working on the procurement side, and in particular the methodologies, while Laurent is more onto the digital aspects of our activities, but we both work on projects and we both help our clients to buy consulting, and in particular that part that is how to invest in the right ones. You were in a call just a minute ago where you were talking exactly about how to utilize consulting to accelerate a transformation. So this is something that is core to our activities. Do you want to add something, Laurent, or do you agree?
It was almost the opposite. I mean, a lot of the conversation we have and we will have today are about we spend too much, and we should prioritize and optimize and select our battles. And the conversation I was in was, well, my management team doesn't want to use consultants, and we are missing the management team to actually use some consulting. So it was almost the opposite question. Say how to demonstrate the value and convince people to use consulting.
But I think that's the same topic, though, is that how do you choose wisely when to use consulting is valid on both not using too much but not using too little, right?
Exactly.
So that's the quote that we love. That says, half the money I spent on advertising is wasted. The trouble is I don't know which half. So here, what we're trying to do today is try to explain how you can understand which part of your spend is the one that is really bringing value, and which one is wasted or at least not bringing as much value, and you could do without. Okay, so that's the idea of that's the mission that we gave ourselves today, is to give you those clues. So
we can probably get a better sense of the value we are getting for our money in consulting than in marketing.
Yeah, I think it's easier, though there are some things that are not easy to measure. So we'll talk about what's the problem today with the consulting spend. We'll go through one of the basics, which is what is value in consulting. I think that is mandatory to understand how to capture value, to really define what value is. And then we'll discuss about what it means to manage consulting as an investment, how demand management is a solution to that, and then we'll give some other tips, a bit more advanced tips. And of course, we'll have a question and answer session. All right. In the meantime, don't hesitate if you have questions along to ask them in the question section. We'll make our best to answer them when they pop up, to really keep them into the conversation, because we're going to cover a lot of ground. And I want to make sure that we're not losing sight of those questions at the moment where you have them, because after it might be a little bit out of context. Okay, let's get started. Are you ready, Laurent?
Yes, and just a quick message. There will be several polls during the course of the presentation. So when you see a red light showing up on the left-hand side of your screen, it's because we are launching a poll, and you might see also some pop-ups. Don't be bothered by them. We'll try not to have too many, but it creates a little bit of I would say concrete feel and substantiation to what we are saying to get the feedback from the participants. So thank you in advance.
All right, so let's go. So the problem with the consulting spend, right? This is probably where we need to spend a bit of time to explain why there is a problem with the consulting spend first, and where does it come from. So what we have seen in the past, because since we've been working on those topics, is that consulting is usually much bigger than we think and much bigger than our clients think. So, and that's more of a problem. So it's not rare that when we announce the number of the consolidated consulting spend across the company, that executives look at us and say, like, really? That much? Yes, that much. So consulting that can be organized with management and IT, go put together, can be very big. And it's often much bigger than the executive know. And the reason comes from many reasons. There are many reasons that explain that. First is that it's rarely monitored, it's rarely measured, and we rarely care about the impact. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the decision making, the way to approve or not a project is often decentralized. So the different business units will decide what project they will launch, but they will not think at it as a whole. And so there might be some projects that are not that are duplicates. There might be a lack of synergies, and also there might be a lack of consistency in the policies and on the decision-making processes. Then you often have decentralized budgets, which means that everyone has their budget and they manage their thing, but there is no consistency overall. And also in some very, very decentralized companies, there are some business units that tend to spend a lot of money on consulting while others don't. And there is no rational reason behind that could explain why it is spending more. It's just ways of working that are different from one business unit to the next.
And if I can give one example on this.
Yes.
The company I was discussing with back in June, indeed, just one country in Europe is indeed even the country. So there's a global company, they have a European unit. In the European unit, they have countries. In the countries, they have, let's say, country A. Country A is made of 150 joint ventures that they have by municipality because they are serving municipal clients. So they have 150 entities within the country entity that is within the European entity that is within the global entity. The total spend of this entity, just one country, was north of 40 million from what I have on top of my head. And indeed, when you have 150 entities that are buying and they represent 40 million, at the end of the day, each of them does not represent even a million. But they end up buying several times the same thing, several times the same project. Sometimes they are buying a project that goes in one direction when another one is buying a project that's going in another direction. There is absolutely no consistency, no optimization. And sometimes they buy from one year to the next the project of the previous year from the other entity, and so on and so on and so on. And if there was a little bit of centralization and optimization, you could shave probably 20 to 30% of the projects. But today it's not the case for governance reasons.
Absolutely. And the last one, it's related to what you were saying, is that that spend is loosely aligned with strategy. which means that not all projects that are launched are actually strategic or advancing the strategy or the transformation. And it's true that we all been in that situation where there's a hiring freeze. No problem. Let's use consultants. We have to do that thing. Oh shoot, we have that big project at the same time. How do we do that? We don't have enough bandwidth to that. Oh, no problem. Let's use consultants. Some projects could be done internally, and they're not because of internal resources not being available, not because they don't have the competencies, not because they shouldn't do that internally, but really because that's a workaround on the lack of resources. And but ultimately, those projects are not necessarily the ones that should consume the consulting budget.
Take another example. Take a global company that has 3 regions. They have ERP systems in each region that are legacy systems because they grew through acquisitions. Each local entity has its own projects to optimize the supply chain, optimize the warehousing, optimize the production, optimize the pricing. All these projects are tied to one version of the ERP system. And there is not a strategy that says, here is how we converge. Then you end up buying a lot of projects, each time in each region, re-specifying the same processes when you could indeed have defined a blueprint that sets the vision and that defines how progressively we will make sure that everyone goes in one direction. As long as you don't have that and you don't enforce it, then everyone is trying to do its best with what he has and the visibility has got. So nobody's fault, but at the end of the day, loosely aligned with strategy and a lot of waste.
Absolutely. So now let's do, let's do the other side. It's true that it is hard when, as an executive, because there are no shared standards of quality in consulting. There are no measurement systems, and very often in companies, there are no clear decision-making processes for consulting. And because, of course, consulting is not managed as an investment, and so it's really hard to do that work of collaboration, of looking for synergies, of working together, if there is no framework that helps you do that properly, and no willingness from the top leadership actually to consider consulting as an investment. So, but there are other categories where we manage as investment. The top of mind are CapEx and R&D. Maybe, Laurel, you can...
At the end of the day, the essence of strategy is resource allocation. And deciding where you invest, and consulting is a lot of money, is paramount for all companies. And when it comes to CapEx, everyone has a CapEx process. I'm not saying that they are managing the CapEx as a portfolio. Sometimes it's still very decentralized. But at least there is a process. There are go-no-go decisions. You need to explain why you want to invest something. And there are validation thresholds depending on the amount that you want to invest. Same thing on R&D. You need to explain what is the potential of this new innovation. You need to explain what are the risks. And then people take a careful decision to go forward or not, to go forward with the concept phase, and then for the development phase, and so on. And most of the time, you have at least once a year a portfolio-based review where you decide on what you're going to do the year after, where you stop some projects, where you accelerate some other projects. And there is no reason not to have the same thing for the investments for transformational activities that are linked to consulting services. Even though it's not really the case. But if you just make this parallel, you have a budget that you need to allocate to the most, I would say, promising opportunities. You do it for CapEx, you do it for R&D, and yet not a lot of people do it for consulting.
Absolutely. So before we get into what could managed consulting as an investment mean in practicality, let's go back to what is value in consulting. So for those of you who came to previous webinars, we've heard about that distinction that we make between technical and political value. This is not something that is really that clear when you have a project. A project usually delivers value that is a mix between technical value that is linked to the know-how, the expertise, or the industry experience, while the political value is more about, you know, how could I put that? The political move within the organization, or how you can use the consultants as a shield sometimes to justify a difficult decision or a scapegoat. All of these are very common in consulting. And a given project rarely deliver one or the other. It's usually a mix of both values. You want to add something, Laurent? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry, I was just pushing out a poll. So
Okay.
I was multitasking, and you caught me off guard on that.
Yeah,
one.
sorry.
But,
I apologize.
It's true that you have those two dimensions, even though at the end of the day, even the political value is to deliver some financial, in most of the cases, financial value, because the political value will enable a decision that would not have been made possible without the political value. So you can, at the end of the day, always bring down the value brought by consulting in 90% of the cases to a financial decision, which will help, and we'll speak about it in the future in the future slides. But even when you think about a transformation, you know, you are working on a project that is looking at enabling the transformation. It's an organization project that will change the way the company is managed. Very difficult to put it on a financial value, except if you are associating this with a headcount reduction, and then you can have some financials. But at the end of the day, if you're moving towards, I would say, a more specialty business, or a more I would say productized business, or these kind of things, you're changing the value of the company, you're changing the multiple, and then you're changing the enterprise value. And that's where the way to manage it. So sometimes you measure at the enterprise value, sometimes you measure at the, I would say, bottom line. But in most of the cases, you can always bring this down to some financial elements.
Yeah, so here we try the exercise to demonstrate the difference. So of course it's exaggerated. It's really to show you on a very visual way what it means. What's the difference between launching a project on your own internally and launching a project with consultants in a lot of cases. So when you launch a project, what happens is that at first you are in the investment phase where you spend more money. And there's no value yet. And after some while, you know, the project is starting to deliver, and then you're creating value, and that's the value that we see with that orange curve. So indeed, every project should look like this. Every project should bring some value. I'm not talking about even a regulatory project that you have to do, because if you don't, you can't operate. You may not creating value per se, additional value, but at least you are avoiding destroying value by launching that project. So indeed, that's value as well. So this is kind of overall, this is how it looks. Then when you launch a project with consultants, what happens very often is that the investment upfront is much higher, and it's much more important right away. But because they're focused, because they're doing only that, and because they have that expertise, and they're dedicated to that, then usually it comes positive much earlier, and then very often you go faster and higher with when working with consultants. So this is that, and what is interesting is that if we talk about the value that consultants should bring on a project, that's the difference between those two curves. That's the difference between doing that internally and doing that with a consultant. So this is a theoretical curve that is not applicable to all projects. And if there are some projects where there is no value, or you don't really get much more value by working with consultants, maybe that's not a project that you should launch with external consultant. Maybe you should consider doing that internally.
Yeah. If we say, can I go faster? Can I go higher? Can I secure that I will achieve the results? Will the results be sustainable if I don't use external help? If the answer to this is yes, then maybe we should just do that internally. But if the answer is no, then the challenge becomes to find the funding here, and to make sure that we can have the upfront cash to be able to fund this early phase that we see on the screen. I'm doing it with my mouse, but indeed you don't see it because Hélène has the control. But at the end of the day, there are also ways by paying after a couple of months, or by delaying, by having some success fees that are paid as value sharing only afterwards. There are ways to smoothen the effort at the beginning. It will also change a little bit the curve a little bit later, but you still capture on the long run the value that you see here. And I would say most of the consultants are trying to find models where not immediately, but after a couple of months, the proceeds that are generated by having the consultants on board are offsetting the cost of the consultant. I would say that's the first step. If at least you can be at zero, anything you get above that is a plus.
So now that we have agreed that indeed creating value with consulting is making something, either making a project doable when it was not the case before, or bringing more value by doing it with external consultant than it would by working internally. So that's kind of a definition that we're going to work with. So what does it mean to manage investment, to manage consulting as an investment? So the first, I think maybe Laurent, you could take over this one.
I will display the results to everyone.
Yes. Okay.
So if you want to comment on this, Hélène, we have 83% of the results saying that I'm afraid we don't have a process. and one brave person that I will not name that of course has a process in place, and I had given a safe answer that nobody dared to use.
Okay, so the good news is that you're not alone. As you can imagine, we don't have many of the clients we work with that have a system in place to manage and to evaluate the investment for consulting. A lot of companies have in place very, very, rustic demand management systems, but very rustic. And we'll see later what it means to have a demand management system for consulting that is efficient. But that's pretty much the extent of what we've seen, right? So going to how to leverage consulting as an organization, because that's what it's about. You invest in consulting because you want to figure out how to accelerate your strategy, how to accelerate your transformation, how to gain a competitive edge. That's why you work with consulting usually. And there are steps that you need to look at. Laurent, can you explicit those steps for us?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the first step is to look at the past, and what are we doing it today? And is the process that we have today in other areas the same, or can we kind of use the same thing, or can we use the same forum also to discuss those resource allocation decisions? Because you could think about internal and external resources in one single bucket. When you have excellence resources or internal consultants, they could be looked at together. Then, based on your strategy, you might have several strategic priority clusters. We will come back to this, but it could be that the priority is on the top line and you want to favor commercial excellence or some marketing initiative or some innovation, or on the contrary, you have an established business but you want to optimize the cost and to run some manufacturing excellence or inventory optimization. It's more the supply chain that will be on your radar. You can look at your priorities for the time being. And then you compare, what are my strategic priorities? What are the projects that I have in my portfolio? And is this aligned? And if I was to optimize this based on the nature of the projects, based on the return on investment of those projects, how do I build a balanced consulting utilization strategy? And it's not very different from what you do in other areas. If I take the example of CapEx, you will have in your CapEx buckets where you will say, I have my first bucket is unfortunately everything that is mandatory for regulatory or safety reasons because I cannot operate. So that's the license to operate. Another one is the maintenance of the asset. You cannot avoid replacing some assets if you want to continue to perform. And then you have a third one that is about growth. What are the growth investments that we want to make? And here it's a little bit the same thing. Are there some things that are mandatory that we need to do for regulatory reasons or because they have been imposed by the board or whatever? And those you have no choice, you need to go with it. There might be, or not, some budget that is associated with what I would call maintenance, but applied to organization. If you want to run some upgrades on your systems, if you want to do some team building, if you want to do some organizational adjustments or this kind of things, it's the maintenance bucket that can be to some extent in your priorities, and then you will have the transformative and value-adding projects. Then in all logic, all the elements that don't correspond to your strategic priorities or to the mandatory or maintenance buckets should be eliminated and should not get a priority in your investments. And when you do that, you either reallocate the budget to new projects or you save that and it goes to your bottom line as savings.
Okay, so when we talk about strategic priorities, I think that is very important is to think about the ROI, right? We need to think about what are those of the projects that bring the highest ROI, and impact their value, if you will, is extremely important, but it has to be in regard to cost, and that's really very, very not often looked at, let's put it that way. And so we kept that little graph that we created to show really, really simply that between the potential of the ROI and the realized ROI, there's only two parts that are really interesting, right? There's a well done and how do we pull this off, where we don't know how we did it, but we did it. But then if you see on the left is that why did we invest in the first place? That's exactly what we were saying. When you don't have a big ROI potential, maybe you should ask yourself, do we really need to invest in that project? Is it really worth it? What will happen if we don't do that project? I think that's very important. But the thing is, this is just one way to look at your portfolio of projects, because as Laura mentioned, actually that's the elements that you were mentioning. There's also other things that ROI that are important. You might have some regulatory updates or notification of changes to implement, because if you don't implement that change, then you might lose your license to operate, and this is not something that you can afford. Or you can also think about risk management. You have some factories where you have some risks that are not yet a problem, but you know that if you don't invest, if you don't maintain, then you will have problems in the future. And then, of course, there's the growth. So how do you decide between the three? Because you could decide to do only regulatory and risk, but then your growth, your future is not there, right? You're not doing anything. Well, if you don't do regulatory, I think that's obvious, the answer. But if you don't work on risk management, then you work mainly on risk management and in iterative changes to the daily business, then how do you prepare the future? So all of this is something that has to be taken into account. And just as the other part, which is transformation, excellence, and enablers. So by enablers, what we mean are projects that are not per se strategic, but they are the ones that allow you to do the other two above. And that's also something that is extremely important. That is it a transformational project? Is it an excellence, like improving productivity, improving ways of working, improving team effectiveness? All that can be excellence. And then there are the enablers.
If you take most of the, I would say, organizational development, organizational design, all these kind of things, but also a lot of IT projects that are creating a common structure, a data lake, or these kind of things, will end up in this bucket, and you will build on top of that. When you calculate the ROI for those projects, they don't have a great ROI because they are enablers for somebody else. So either you pick the part of the value of the other initiatives to allocate here and to justify the enabler, or you agree that the enablers are key to enable something else, and you allocate a protected budget for this.
Absolutely. So all of this is good, and we can always, organize and set. But the problem is that we don't operate it with unlimited budget, right? We have a limited budget, and very often companies have defined a budget for consulting, and this is it. And I would go to the next extent that sometimes they even do, that exercise said, so the budget is consulting is the same than last year, minus 10%. I'm sure you've been there, right? And so this is something that you need to play with. The other point that is extremely important is bandwidth. So one of the prerequisites to work with consultants is to be able to manage the project and engage in the project with them. If you don't have the bandwidth, you don't have the ability, or you don't have the skills to do that, don't work with consultants because it won't end well. You need to be able to supervise. You need to be able to deliver with them the project and make sure that the project delivers the value that you expect from them. The other part also is timing and sequencing. All projects cannot be launched at the same time, and there is an order that brings more value. And Laurent was mentioning those projects, those enablers that don't have a lot of value per se, but actually they allow you to do other projects. Obviously, this project must be done before the other ones, right? This is pretty obvious. There are also some other timing constraints that can be added to the equation, because you might have a huge executive committee on a given topic, or a commission, or anything, and you need result at a certain time, and that will allow you to kind of put your project in the right order as well. That will give you some sort of a constraint on how and when you need to put project, and you might not be able to start with those who bring most value first, and you just because you have some time constraints on the other one. And the last one, it's something that I think stays completely under the radar, is that some projects are extremely time sensitive, because every week you don't launch them, you're losing value, and that value may not be completely recovered. So let's imagine that you are a company that has, today you have a given level of revenues, right? And the more we go, because you have issues with the with your raw materials, and you have your raw materials that have increased, and then you have less access to stores and so on for X reason, because you're renegotiating a contract and so on. Every week you're losing margin and you're losing revenues. If you don't do anything, then you're going to end up at almost nothing. If you start a project to help revisit the pricing, look on raw materials renegotiation and procurement and all of those levels, you might be able not only to go back to the initial level, but go faster and higher. The problem is that every week that you lose, because your revenues are declining, it gets harder and harder to get to the initial target. This project is extremely time sensitive. You need to start as fast as possible, right?
Add to this, there is a very, very interesting question that I tried to model with equations, a book, but everyone tells me that it's very difficult to understand and that I should rephrase it. But anyway, I try to simplify here, is that if there is a high impact and if there is a time dimension to to the project, finding the most cost-efficient consultant might not be a priority. What you really want is a consultant that can deliver fast and deliver the maximum impact. And when you look at the ratio between what you get and what you pay, sometimes finding 20% of savings if you have a 10x return on investment doesn't make any sense. Yes, they would be welcome. Everybody welcomes 20% of savings. But if you compare that with losing 3 months in endless negotiation, or losing 3 months because you work with a consultant that has no clue about your organization and has to relearn everything and so on, you might end up opting for a solution that looks good, but that is not indeed the optimum one for your company.
So I think that what is really important in what you just said is that you cannot look at it just from one angle. You have to have the big picture and really look at everything as not only the price, but also the value and also the timing. And all of this is how you make your decision. So we come to the next step, which is how do you take into account all those different elements that we discussed before and use that to make a decision that is relevant and that is really good to bringing you more value and making sure you invest your money in the project that really are, pushing your organization and your strategy forward. So demand management is that tool, but with a tweak. So this is another quote that I like a lot. It's that don't tell me what your priorities are. Show me where you spend your money, and I will tell you what they are. So I think it is really true, in particular in consulting. You can always say, "Oh, our priority is to become number one," blah 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 blah. But if most of your money is spent on, and of course, I'm not talking about anyone. It's not a real company, right? It's a company that is spending more than half of the consulting on ERP, ERP consulting, ERP adaptation, and so on. What your priority is to have the best ERP ever on earth. That's it. That's your priority. That's your highest priority.
This could be an enabler to have clear data, to have analytical accounting, to be able to optimize the supply chain afterwards. But it's true that it shouts the lack of, I would say, investment or resources allocated to innovation, to commercial excellence, to marketing, to all kind of other activities. On the other hand, for instance, in my time with Solvay, we made a review of our portfolio of initiatives. And we saw that indeed we had a 5x return, if not more, on all manufacturing excellence activity. And we had a much lower return on all the commercial excellence and marketing activities, which indeed was linked to the fact that none of the market leaders wanted to commit on any upside to their targets. But as a consequence, we pretty much disbanded the marketing excellence group, because the payback was not demonstrated.
Yeah, and that's a shame, because we all know that marketing and commercial excellence project bring value.
Well, what can I say? If the plant managers are willing to take targets and the market leaders do not,
well, that's on them, right? After all, you can only, you have to.
Well, that's also on the management. If you don't ask the market leaders and you just upgrade their targets, and then they have no way to reach the target but to go through an excellence program, then maybe they are more willing to listen to the excellence program. It's a chicken and egg. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So I said that demand management was the solution, but there's a tweak in here. Is that demand management, and it is applied today, which is, and I'm not even exaggerating that much. So like all project under X gonna be, we'll do approve automatically, and the other one we'll discuss together if we want to do it or not. And that's pretty much it. So fair enough. So that means that they have decided to give a budget that is protected for small initiatives, which is not a bad thing, to be honest. But then overall, they may not have a strong framework to decide if a project should or should not be launched. So what we show here is what are some of the considerations that you should integrate into a demand management system for consulting, which is very specific. The first one, and we discussed that, lengthily before, is the project strategic for the company? So don't understand that as strategic as strategy. Understand that as, is it a very important project for us? Is it because it's an enabler? Is it a project that is pushing transformation or pushing excellence and we need it? Is it regulatory? Is it a high priority for that? Is it a high...
Implementing a sustainability group within an organization to be part of the Dow Jones Index or for, I would say, other reasons related to the values or the vision of the company could be considered a strategic initiative and can yield value on the long run. On the short term, it will be a cost. On the long run, it will add value. Absolutely.
Then what is the expected impact of the project? So here, we're not talking about hard dollars. We're talking about impact of the project. So indeed, let's talk about a regulatory project. A regulatory project will have a tremendous impact on your business, and therefore it qualifies under right? Then how much are you willing to pay for that project? So that's a very important part. Then are you ready to invest? It makes a project, it makes it important. Anyway, you need everyone to be on board to launch a project. So it's not a rhetorical question here. Then what's the best timing? This one is uber important. Why is it? Because you may have a project that is strategic, that will have a huge impact, that you are ready to invest in. You say, yes, we want to do that. But the thing is, this is a project that could wait another year. Now, think about it. Can we wait another year? It's not time sensitive. We could do it next year. And do I have other projects in my portfolio that are a little less impactful, but much more urgent? Right? If this is that, and if that's the case, then maybe you can postpone. If that's not the case, then do it.
At the end of the day, it comes down to what's my target. Do I have a target to generate an impact in EBIT and cash this year? Do I have a target to generate value over the next 3 years? And then in that case, it's an NPV. It all depends on the priorities of the company, but it's worth asking oneself the question.
Yeah, and I think also it depends on how much of the budget this project will consume and what are the other priorities that are next to it. It's kind of a balance between that. And then there is one last that is about the skills. And here, this is about the idea that when you launch a project that will necessitate to develop a given skill, then it might make sense to launch it now. So you're building up the skill internally and you use knowledge transfer and you use the right consultant that are transferring knowledge, because they don't do that always. And then you can really have a strategic, management of how you build your skills internally. So it's not only about the project itself. It has to be linked to other elements in the company. So now we wanted to give you kind of a sense of, we discussed about, these are the type of questions that you could ask yourself before you implement demand management. But what is a demand management system for consulting that works? So the first thing is it has to be pragmatic. Of course, a simple workflow, just like the one I described before, with one threshold and that's it. That might be a little bit simple, but you still need to have something that is limited, that is easy and easy to understand, easy to adhere to, and that has consistency in application and decision making across the organization. So this is very important. It may not be the same threshold, it may not be exactly, but there has to be some consistency. So you're not just inventing something new for each and every department and business unit. Mm-hmm. The second thing is that it has to be flexible. So, and that's for two reasons. The first one is that every company has a different structure and a different culture. Even when you talk about decentralized companies, they will have different ways to be decentralized, and there will have different ways to handle this decentralization. And it's important to think within the system and make sure that it aligns with it. You cannot go against it, because if you do, it will not be applied. That's very easy. They will find workaround. And the most common workaround is to say, oh, so every project under 150 is approved directly? Fine. And you'll see loads of projects that are on 149K, right? That will just go through directly without any approval necessary. So, and you don't want that. You want them to play along because it's easy, because it makes sense. Then, of course, you need to allow some degree of autonomy and discretion for managers in the decision-making process. Give them an envelope that they can use without going through all the loops, that when they have a need that is immediate, that is small, and where speed is of the essence, right? And then you need to have some flexibility, because a strategy department will not have the same needs and the same requirements than an operation department. So you need to make sure that this is integrated in the way you build your system and in the way you build the envelopes and the thresholds, actually. All right. The fourth element is agile. So one thing we know is that between January 1st and December 31st, there are many things that can happen. You know, a few years ago, actually it was 2 years ago, we worked with a high-tech company, and we helped them, define a strategy project. At the very end of the project, we had to stop everything because the CEO, it was the CEO,
yep,
was let go. And like in the middle of a strategy project whose goal was to define the strategy for the next 3 years. And the CEO was told, well,
actually not to define the strategy, but to identify structuring targets for acquisition that would double the size of the company.
Yes, right. Just nothing. And so, right. And so just in the middle, everything changed. So we had to pause everything and make sure that the new CEO was fine with that, and everything was postponed, and then it starts again faster. It means that in the span of 12 months, a lot of things can happen. There can be a lot of changes. The strategies can pivot, the top leadership can change, and you need a system that allows you to adapt to your business priorities. Another example is a company that we worked with that had a fire in one of their facilities, and it destroyed their facility. They had to close it down for months, and it means that there was a whole part of the business that was down. Of course, when you are in that situation, not only your business priority in terms of operation change, but also I guess that there were a lot of projects around what do we do with this? How do we deal with the people that are there? What are our options for the future? Do we reopen? Do we close down? Do we sell? Right? All of these can happen. And the last part is transparency. And that's probably the most difficult one, because discussing about why a project is more important than another one is tough, and sometimes it's not possible to some extent. But I think that it's a good practice to try to explain and justify the decisions, to make sure that people really buy in and understand why, and make sure that the decision-making process is clear and visible to everyone. Right? That's probably key. And then the last part is that a demand management system cannot work from procurement only. This is not true. A demand management system.
Before you jump to that one.
Yeah.
On the last one, that was visibility on the decision making.
Yes.
One of the virtue of that one is simply that if the decision making is visible, you think twice before asking for a nice to have project.
True. There's some virtue in that. It's true.
So there is self-discipline just coming from the transparency.
It's true. And the last thing is that you cannot run that just from procurement. Of course, procurement has to be involved in a way or another, but you can see from everything we said there that this is very linked to transformation, strategy, excellence, and finance. All those transversal functions have a role in helping explicit what are the priorities and what are the evolutions that are there or that we need to expect so we can adapt. So it cannot be something that is done in the procurement backyard.
Yeah.
And second thing,
in an organization, in most of the cases, when there is a budget, there is someone that is centralizing this budget, owning this budget, maybe not taking all the decisions on this budget, but at least overseeing whatever is happening. It can be finance, it can be strategy, it can be transformation, it can be excellence, but those people have to be involved, and in many cases, it's just a collegial decision. So that's why having a governance body that's looking at those things is usually the way to go.
Absolutely. So, how does a balanced project portfolio look like, Laurent? Tell me.
Well, in an ideal world, you want to shave all the elements that we have just described as non-priorities. So non-strategic projects, low ROI projects, nice-to-have projects, redundant projects. You want to kill those in order to either save money, which means that you will allocate less and you will kind of use your war chest to something else, or you can spend the exact same amount of money, but you change the allocation, which means that your strategic and high ROI projects will get the lion's share. Then you have the maintenance, the enablers, and the mandatory ones. Maybe not in that order, but you see the gist and the direction of what I'm talking about. And in doing so, you, by experience, can increase the return on your consulting spend by 30 to 50%. It sounds like a big number, but it's what we see when we run this kind of projects. Speaking about this, I'll just show briefly, even though we had only half the votes, but I'll show briefly the results from the survey. We see the results. Hélène, you see them?
Yes, I see them.
Yeah, where we can see in the answers provided by the participants that on average, we have less than 10% for somebody. So we just change the ballpark of all this. But at the end of the day, we are looking at, in most of the cases, 20% at least of budget that can be reallocated. I'm not saying it can be saved. You can just redeploy it. And often that's what happens in companies. But if you redeploy something that brings 0 to something that brings 3x, you can imagine the impact on your returns.
Absolutely. So these are principles on demand management, but moving forward, and in particular, if you're a more mature company, there is a very powerful couple which is made of demand management and make or buy. And here we gave you an example of a matrix that explains on the bottom side, you'll see the strategic value. This is what we discussed so far. You know, it's must have, nice to have. So this way, we're not talking about it's strategic per se, but we must implement, or we could. It would be nice. And then on the left-hand side, we have the externalization value. By externalization value, we're talking about, you remember the curve with the two curves that we showed, and we say when you're working with an external consultant, the gap in value, this is the same idea. That is there value in working with external consultants, and that value can be low and can be high. And so you see that in that case that you have very clearly on the left the seriously bucket and red, which is nice to have, whatever the externalization value, actually, do we really need to invest in that? Does it really make sense? Until it gets, a must-have, but until then it stay there. Then on the right-hand side, you have high value must-have, like there's no question asked. You go, you work, it has more value working with external. It's either, and so the value is not necessarily about dollars. It can be skills as well. That's very important. And I mentioned that before a bit, but sometimes the value is working with external consultant is not about how much money or bottom line or top line you can get, but just because you're building internally a capability or you're building a skill internally, and then you are making sure that in the future, in 3-5 years from now, you'll have a function that has the right skills and the right knowledge. So that's another way to look at value, right? And then you have on the bottom, you have a must-have but low external value. That's an in-house project. That's typically a project where you have, for instance, confidentiality issues. When you are in a project that has very sensitive confidentiality information, the value to externalize is kind of, let's say, diminished by the risk you're taking in giving that information outside. And so it's sometimes much better to do that in-house. And then you have the two in the middle. One that is, I have a bit of budget on my hands, and so it could be interesting to launch that project because I could develop my teams, right? But we consider that as a internal project potentially, and then you have in the middle you have what we call hybrid execution. And so hybrid execution, you're trying to get the best of both worlds. You're trying to use consultants, but also internal teams. So like that, you're focusing the consultants on the part of your project where the externalization value is higher. So you really get the best of that. And for the others, you do internally.
Take as an example, putting in place a project management office. Structuring the project management office, defining the project charters, defining the governance, all these kind of things, having some external help makes sense. But then running the PMO, you don't need to pay consultants $2,000 a month, and I'm generous with 2,000. It's often 50%, if not more, higher than this, to just collect the progress status of the various project leaders and consolidate that in a management presentation. So creating an hybrid team where you have the consultants, but also some internal resources, and progressively the consultants will depart and the internal resources will take over is a very nice way to internalize some knowledge and also save on cost.
Absolutely. And if you're interested in that topic of delivery model, that's the topic of the next webinar in January. And we'll dive into the best delivery model, and we'll explain what the change in the industry and how we can take advantage of that to get the best delivery model for our project. And so that was pretty much it. So you see, we have many questions, but only one answer. So please ask your question. Do you have questions? That's the time. Please put that in the question section. I have only one answer, so let's be very, very efficient on that. Anyone? Are you're just under the shock of everything we said?
It was pretty quiet in that for once in the chat.
Yeah, well, that happens. It's I guess that I hope this was interesting though.
No worries on that. People participated in the polls. I was surprised to see that everyone is considering make or buy, because that's a practice I've not seen that often. But as that is the next topic, I'm making a transition with your next slides.
Yes.
One of the topics for the next presentation. You will have the
so just very quickly, if you're interested, what is externalization of value? I missed that one. This is not externalization of value. This is externalization value, the value of outsourcing to external consultants. This is what it is. I hope that's clearer like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's true. So just that you know, we're launching a new service that is a consulting pricing index. It's just fresh from the oven. So if you're curious about what it does and what it could be, don't hesitate to send us a quick email, and we can hop off a 15-minute call, and we'll tell you everything about it. We made sure that it was well done and affordable for everyone. So that's that. I won't say more than that. And the last part, thank you for coming. Thank you for participating. And then next webinar is in January 18th. It will be about select the right delivery model. We'll talk about make or buy, but in a way that is much more granular than doing or not doing. It's not only making or buying, it's making with a little buy, buying with a little make, and everything in between. And also exploring.
And also what kind of consultant to use for what kind of capability and what kind of expertise, because using the same consultant for everything in many cases does not make sense.
There's that point, and also taking advantage of the evolution of the value chain in consulting that is giving the access to clients to many of the subparts that were before only accessible through consultants. I'm saying market research, expertise, deep expertise, and data analytics and things like that are now available directly to the client. That's, well, it was not the case like 15 years ago. So now there are many other options that can be used to find the right delivery model. I think that's it. We're just on time, 2 minutes past the time. So that's it for once we're on time. Thank you to everyone. If you have other questions, you can just send us an email. Drop me an email at the email that you have here, scl@consultingquest.com. Please feel free to ask any question. We'll be very happy to answer that. If you have a question that requires a bit of time, don't hesitate to send us a note, and we can hop on a short call to answer your question. Thank you to
As
all.
usual,
yes,
everything will be made available to everyone.
Yes, of
you will
course.
receive an email with the link to the webinar.
So you will receive the version, the video version of the session after it's done. If you need the slides, we will share them in our. We will share them tomorrow in our community on LinkedIn. You just if you are not part of the community, just type Smart Consulting Sourcing. I will type it here. Smart Consulting Sourcing. Just tap that, ask to be part of the community, and you will be able to download the slides that will be available right away tonight or tomorrow morning. Thank you to all. Have a very good end of your day, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.